Representative Nick Santucci. Thank you for joining me on Message from the House.
Good to be with you, Olivia. Thanks for having me.
We were excited that you wanted to come on and talk about workforce development. Obviously, it's so important for our state, the economy. And I just want to jump right in by asking, why is this a topic that you've become so passionate about?
Yeah, so, jumping back and rewinding time, before I became a state representative, I worked in the Youngstown Ward Regional Chamber, so I come from business background. And my job at the time was education and workforce development. My role was to identify what the business community needed in order to hire folks, and then work with the education partners to identify what qualifications we need to provide our students in order to get them qualified for those jobs. And it was really amazing. But the more I worked in that space, the more the passion kind of came out. And the more I really realized how important all of that development as a whole, community development, economic development, workforce development as a whole, makes a huge impact on our state. And when I moved out of education and workforce, I then moved into economic development and then into government affairs and then over to an educational service center and then ultimately ran. But the more we understand how all of those are intertwined, I think the better trajectory we are for moving Ohio forward.
And we try to keep it light. I just asked you about this. We need to talk about our first jobs.
Yeah.
Let the people know. What did you do as your first job?
It's a great question. My first job I laid brick was my grandfather. And I've introduced a few bills to try to, speak to some of this. And we've talked, before we started our podcast here. But laying brick was my grandfather, I think, was transformative for me, right? Because it set a basic skill level that propelled me, and I argue probably put me to where I am today here in the legislature. And I have said this before, that I would argue if we went around the room and everybody talked about their first job, obviously you're not still in that role, but the skills you learn are transferable. And right now what we're seeing, a lot of our young people aren't entering into the workforce. And so we've got to start changing our messaging and encouraging them to enter the workforce so that they can pay taxes and contribute to society and be productive citizens. I had shared a chart with you, and I'm sure we'll be able to put it on the screen here. But 18 to 24-year-olds, we're seeing significant drops in their workforce participation. That's concerning to me, because when we're looking at workforce development and getting people qualified and capable for their jobs, they're not entering the workforce until later in their life, which means we're denying those young people all of that transformative, transferable skills that I talked about earlier. And so we now have a human capital that's entering into the workforce. They go all through high school not working, they go all through college not working, and then they show up to their first job and they think they deserve to make $150,000 a year, and they have no skill set. And so we've got to start changing our mindset here in Ohio and really start encouraging young people to get into the workforce.
I remember, I think I could start working for the city of Hilliard. That was where I was employed with first. Great community. Folks are still there. I think I was 13 or 14 when I think you could sign up to lifeguard.
Yeah.
And I was itching, right? I wanted to get out of the house. I wanted to earn money. Obviously, as a 13-year-old, you don't realize, the taxes and things that are taken out and having to file and things like that. But like you said, a lot of life skills you learn just from these odd jobs. It doesn't necessarily have to be an internship or be an internship. It could be laying brick. It could be lifeguarding.
But to your point, those skills about the taxes and all that, people don't understand that. So when young people aren't identifying those types of real life scenarios until they're 24 plus, that's harmful to the state. And I think the best route forward is identifying this group of young people. Getting them into the workforce is only going to help everybody. And kudos to you for 13 getting a job. That's great. That's what we want.
I think I was just excited to socialize with maybe the upperclassmen, but I want to talk about working hard. All of my swim friends were lifeguards, so it was a natural. I get to hang out with my friends. I get to work.
It's a no-brainer.
Yes.
But it made you better. It made you better.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We'd work 9-10-hour days out in the sun. Not babysitting children, but sometimes, and
sure.
Having to learn CPR and all of those things that really important.
So you learned fiscal responsibility because you got a paycheck. You learned time management and accountability because you had to show up on time. I'm sure you had a boss or somebody you reported to. I mean, you learned intercommunicative skills, working with other colleagues, older or not, whatever. You had interpersonal skills. So I think it's those types of things that people just overlook.
For sure.
But the reality is they all they're all building blocks to a better human being. And that's what we want here in Ohio. We want all Ohioans to be well-rounded and invested in. And I think the best route for anybody in our state is to get a job. And that will put them on a better path than any government program that we could offer.
Yeah. And I want to jump into, you have introduced legislation to prepare high schoolers in specific for post-graduation. It is House Bill 119. I said that's strange. What is your goal for that?
Yeah, so that's the Grad Act. So what we found is working with our young people, a lot of them do want to work. The challenge has been that they get overwhelmed with the process of how to apply for a job or how to work, I guess, so to speak. So, when we identify a student and they want to be an astronaut, we as school districts or the state come in and we say, if you want to be an astronaut, you got to take all these science courses. When I was in high school, I wanted to hang with my buddies and go work out and do things like that. I wasn't thinking about all of the science curriculum I needed to participate in order to be an astronaut or whatever the job field is. And so I think we've kind of overwhelmed some of our young people with all of these curriculums and all of these career pathways. And so what the Grad Act is going to do is it's going to bring businesses into the school district and allow young people to actually go business to business and learn what opportunities are out there for them. And I think if we can get them an internship or an externship opportunity or a real life paying opportunity, it's a no-brainer. That's what we want to have done. And so the Grad Act, I think, is a good step forward to working with our school districts and our business community, getting them merged and ultimately getting young people exposure, real life exposure to some of these career paths.
That's amazing. Honestly, I know I keep mentioning it, but I just knew that my friends were lifeguarding, and that's what I did. I don't think I knew the scope of the opportunities that were available or how to go about it. And I want to segue into House Bill 98 as well that you mentioned, kind of working with the Grad Act to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, so House Bill 98, that's my Community Connectors bill. That bill I'm super passionate about. We talked about the youth employment numbers, and that was kind of the precipice for a bill like this. What my hope is with this bill is that we start to fill some of the entry-level jobs that exist in our community, in our state. And what the state will do is we will work with educational service centers throughout Ohio. The state will hire a job coordinator that will be housed at those ESCs, and that job coordinator will go into each school district, recruit young people that want to work, teach them soft skills and professional skills, and then ultimately place them in a real life job opportunity. And we hear that all the time with the business community that businesses would rather hire a person that can make eye contact and dress appropriately for interviews rather than the person that graduated from Harvard. Because they believe that if you have those interpersonal skills or those soft skills or professional skills, they can mold you into the role that they need. It's when, we're not doing that right now in the state. And because we're not, it's putting our young people out. And so that is our Community Connectors bill. I'm really proud of that bill. And we had sponsored testimony, a proponent testimony, and Higher Ed and Workforce Committee. Went extremely well, so I'm really proud of that. The committee seems very favorable. The speaker seems very favorable. So I'm prayerful. I'm praying that we'll get it across the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. And at such a good time, even if it doesn't make it to the governor's desk in 2 weeks, when a lot of these kids are out of school and looking for summer jobs, I just feel like it's so nicely timed that summer jobs and employment in general during this time of the year for kids in high school. Forward is top of mind. Graduation.
No brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the topic of these continued programs, I know we're jumping around a little bit.
Sure, no, it's good.
This budget is getting some funding for the Merit Scholarship, the Choose Ohio First, and the Tech Credit. How do you believe that these will specifically expand the state's economy?
Well, I say it all the time that government is not going to solve the workforce challenges that we face. These programs are really great. They're well intended, and I do think they all make an impact. But what we have to do is create a bridge for people to enter the workforce. And we have great programs like Ohio Means Jobs. That's a federally funded program. Those dollars flow in from the federal government. They go to the state. That helps us fund Ohio Means Jobs. But it's those types of things. Tech Cred is another extremely great example of a program that is creating the environment that's allowing people to grow and thrive. And that is our role in government, at least the way I see it. If we can have individuals that get an entry-level role, have that business invest in that person to elevate them, that it's stellar, because that proves to that employee that company is willing to invest in them, and that shows a growth opportunity for them as professional. So Tech Cred, some of the programs you outlined are really great, but I think the role of the state needs to be creating the environment that allows people to invest in themselves. Some of those programs do that, and I think we have a lot more work to do, but I think all of the ones that you outlined are great.
I think a lot more attention has been put recently on the different opportunities aside from the traditional college education, go on to get a job, from there. Obviously, that's great as well. We're seeing a shortage in vocational labor sectors. Talk me through how we draw people and continue to draw people to these industries.
I think you're spot on, Olivia. I think we have seen a total shift, encouraging young people to enter into career tech, which is fantastic. Even trades and labor, which I think is super stellar as well. And I think how we change that narrative is just talking about it, right? Is changing that perspective. For years and years, we've always been told, you got to go to college to be successful. You got to go get a degree to make a lot of money. And I'm not quite sure that's the case. I had mentioned to you earlier that I laid brick with my grandfather. His name is Nick Santucci. I'm Nick Santucci. I could have probably grown into his small business.
Yeah.
And probably never even really laid a brick. I could have absorbed his company. We made the transition, but I had never asked him, hey, Papa, what's your salary range? And maybe that's because, we had, there was a respectful dynamic there between grandson and grandfather. But I wish I would have had that conversation with him, because I probably would have had a totally different career path had I just asked him and learned a little bit more about why he got involved in laying brick and, what the vision was for him and his future. But I think, going long-winded, but getting to the point, I think we have to start changing that dynamic and starting to push young people or adults in general into these types of roles. When we pull the in-demand jobs list, all of the jobs that you outlined are the most in demand: your trades, your labor, your career tech. And I always say the career tech centers are the direct pipeline into the workforce, because you can go, you get your certification, and you can get a job right away. Same thing with the trades and labor. You get paid while you're learning your credentials and your skill set, and then you're placed in a real life job opportunity. No brainer. I think the way we pivot our economy is by just talking about it, like you and I are doing today.
Yeah, I have friends will obviously keep everything anonymous, even though I'm sure that they would openly talk about it. Had a brother, did not go to school, went right into construction management, starting at probably $80,000, right? Other brother goes to college, gets the financial planning degree, starts at $45,000 at a financial planning firm. Obviously has the college debt and ultimately follows in brother's footsteps of, hey, I can use my hands, I can be out in the community, I can make a good living. And okay, now you have college debt and you're not even using that degree.
Right. Both equally successful. Unfortunately, the one gentleman that you described had to go kind of through the hills and valleys to get to where he ended up being. But it's true. It's you don't look at those types of careers until you start to see the salary ranges that you make, unfortunately, as terrible as that sounds.
Yeah.
And when I was working at the Youngstown Warren Chamber, I would always talk with the school districts, and I would ask them, are you working with students on what roles they want to pursue? And they'd say, oh, yeah. And I would always say, well, just make sure you put the salary range of that job on the chalkboard or the whiteboard for the students. And it's funny, once you do that, students start to think a little more they're a little more open-minded on where they want to go with their life. Just by knowing, starting out at $80,000 a year, that's a really, really nice opportunity.
Yeah, and a much needed skill, right? I mean, we need those folks. I certainly can't do anything at construction other than maybe change a light bulb, but even that would be, I think I'd call my landlord when it.
No, I'm sure you're great.
No, I can throw myself out of the bus in that department. On the topic of the trades,
sure.
House Bill 159, that will be extending the Manufacturing Technologies Assistant Grant Program. Kind of talk me through that.
Sure. So that is another really important bill that I'm really proud of. I'm working with Representative Steve Demetrio, who's my buddy here in the House. And when we talk with manufacturers or businesses in general, a lot of times what we find is these businesses are working with outdated technologies. They have big machines that are very, very expensive. They're cutting steel, they're cutting, aluminum, whatever it is. And what that outdated equipment is doing is putting them behind, because as other states are investing in these types of technologies, they're able to move product more efficiently and effectively. When Ohioans and our Ohio businesses aren't doing that, that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. And so the vision of this bill is to create a grant program that will allow our manufacturers throughout the state of Ohio to apply for these dollars to say, hey, look at us. We're doing really great work. We just need to take it a step above or tier up our effort. And the state is willing to invest in their technology so that they can be more productive and more efficient. Manufacturing has always been a major component to the state of Ohio, to my district in Trumbull County. And I felt like this bill was just totally a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Several bills you're working on, definitely a champion for workforce development. I'm learning too. So that'll be great to see how all of those progress. On a broader scope, have you heard from constituents? Do we know why young people aren't working? Is it mainly just they don't know the options? You provided a list of the job postings currently in your district, along with some numbers. What do you take from all of it?
Yeah, I think part of it is being overwhelmed. We had talked about that a little earlier in our podcast here about students just being overwhelmed. A lot of it, I think, is a cultural shift too, yeah. Olivia. Our young people were hearing that they're not getting their driver's license right away any longer. They're not moving out of their house, as quick as maybe you and I did when we were, becoming more young professionals. And so I think it's a cultural shift but I think, like I mentioned, we just have to start talking about it and encouraging them that you should start investing in yourself and being a productive citizen. When I used to work at the Youngstown Ward Chamber, I would pull the same data that I had provided you. And folks would come into my office and they'd say, oh, Ohio's terrible. There's no jobs here. This area is depressed. And I would always joke and pull the list of those jobs out. And I'd say, well, what job do you want? Because there's thousands of jobs in Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana County. And it wasn't me trying to be smart. It was me trying to push back on them to say that there's tons of opportunity here in the state. It's really identifying your lane and your role as to what you want to fill. And once you do that, then we'll be able to help you. But I think people today, for some reason, kind of expect the job to just fall in their lap or expect something magical to happen where they are on a trajectory to make $150,000 a year. And I don't think people fully understand that there's a windup, right? You have to take your first job, learn from that job, move into your next job, and that will propel you to where you're supposed to be. And so I think it's a combination of challenges that we face. And I think our state, as great as Ohio is, we have a lot of challenges. We have a drug issue here in the state. 40 to 60% of applicants fail their drug tests going through an interview process. That's hurting businesses and the economy. We've got human trafficking concerns that here in the state. And I think, when you have a young family and you're trying to determine where you want to live or relocate, human trafficking, you want to move to a state that's safe, right? And you want to move to an area that's clean and beautified and perfect so you can put your kids through proper education. Yeah. Human trafficking is a major problem. Ohio ranks 4th or 5th worst human trafficking states in the country. based off whatever study you look at, which 4 or 5 doesn't really matter. It's terrible. We really shouldn't be that low. We've got to do better, I think, overall. And I think more people will want to move here. And I think ultimately more people will enter the workforce if we do that.
Where do you see other opportunities to continue to either, promote workforce development, whether that's, creating new legislation, continuing to have these conversations as a caucus or with your constituents in the community? Have you thought about what's next? I'm sure, you have plenty about what's now, but.
Yeah, so a great question. I appreciate that. I think my hope is to get some of these bills that we discussed today through the finish line. And I think I have a good feeling we'll be able to make a big impact with the legislation we discussed. But I would say 2 things I'm passionate about, I would say, is tourism. Ohio has a lot to offer, and I think sometimes we don't put our best foot forward all the time. We have waterways and entertainment parks and all kinds of things, and Florida gets a lot of attention, and Texas and Tennessee, Nashville, and I think Ohio can compete. And I think we have to, brag about ourselves a little bit more. I think tourism plays a huge role in that. The second thing I think too is beautification, and I kind of touched on it earlier. But from an economic development standpoint, when we're attracting Fortune 100 and 500 CEOs, businesses into the state, oftentimes they land at our airports. And I've been a huge advocate in this caucus, in this General Assembly, talking about beautification of our airports, because that's the first impression to a CEO when they land in our state. And so I think kind of figuring out what we have to do to put our best foot forward, not only from an economic standpoint, but from just a looking out the window standpoint as well. And, I think that all helps optics. Perception's reality, right? So if we're perceived to be a well put together state with beautiful landscaped areas and beautiful airports and beautiful roads all filled with potholes so that we don't have potholes, I think more people will want to move here.
Yeah, I always, I lived in Savannah, Georgia for 2 years, right? They don't have to do much other than talk about the beach and climate and things like that. But, Columbus being, a young person and just how much opportunity, there is in the workforce. Obviously, Savannah is beautiful, but there's only 150,000 people. It's a small area. You come to a Columbus, a Cleveland, a Youngstown, a Toledo, Cincinnati. There's just so many different opportunities. So we definitely have a lot to offer. I can't believe I'm saying that. We win, Mom. I came back.
We're glad to have you here. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Representative Nick Santucci, for coming on as it's from the House.
My honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I should go through our social media pages really quickly. As always, you can follow us on the Ohio House GOP Caucus on Facebook, the Ohio House _GOP on Instagram, and you can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.